The year is 1387. Sleepy Hollow, a village nestled deep within a secluded valley, still bore the deep scars of the Black Death. Though years had passed since the pestilence subsided, a different kind of sickness lingered, a gnawing fear that clung to the villagers like the morning mist. Empty homes stood as silent monuments to the lives lost, their vacant windows like hollow eyes staring into the valley's soul. The fields, once vibrant with crops, now yielded meager harvests, the earth seemingly cursed by the touch of death. Annalise, a young woman from one of Sleepy Hollow's oldest families, felt the weight of this unease more than most. She remembered the tales her grandmother told, whispered stories of ancient spirits and creatures that roamed the woods when shadows grew long. The woods surrounding Sleepy Hollow were old, their ancient trees reaching towards the heavens like skeletal fingers. Annalise had always felt a sense of foreboding within their depths, a feeling that something unseen was always watching. Lately, she had noticed strange disturbances, broken branches, trampled undergrowth, and an unsettling silence that had fallen over the forest, silencing the birdsong that once filled the air. One evening, while gathering herbs near the forest's edge, Annalise discovered a patch of disturbed earth. Mixed with the muddy soil, she saw hoofprints and something darker, something that stained the ground a sickening crimson. A cold dread washed over her. It was more than just a wild animal. This was something else. Something that spoke of the old stories, the legends her grandmother had warned her about. Fear, already a constant companion in Sleepy Hollow, began to fester and spread like a disease. Whispers of a spectral horseman, headless and vengeful, echoed through the darkened streets. Annalise overheard the hushed conversations, the terrified pronouncements of the villagers. The stories were always the same: a dark figure on horseback, its head missing, riding through the night, leaving a trail of terror in its wake. Superstition, like a creeping vine, began to choke the last vestiges of reason. Protective symbols and charms appeared on doors, crude drawings depicting the terrifying apparition, a desperate attempt to ward off the encroaching darkness. But Annalise knew that fear alone would not save them. She felt a growing responsibility to uncover the truth, to separate the whispers of superstition from the unsettling reality she had glimpsed in the woods. Her gaze drifted towards the distant silhouette of the monastery, a place of learning and faith. Perhaps, she thought, the answers lay not in the shadows of the forest, but within the walls of that sacred place. The dawn was coming, but the night was far from over. The air in Sleepy Hollow grew thick with unease. Whispers like creeping vines wound their way through the village, each tale more frightening than the last. The Headless Horseman had been sighted, they said, riding on a black steed, its hooves striking sparks against the cobblestones. Sergeant Klaus, ever the pragmatist, attempted to quell the growing panic. "These are just stories," he boomed, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Tales told to frighten children. There is no Headless Horseman, only fear." But his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Brother Matthias, summoned from the nearby monastery, offered a different kind of solace. He spoke of faith, of the strength to be found in God, and the power of reason to dispel the shadows of fear. "Let us not succumb to superstition," he urged, his voice gentle but firm. "Let us seek understanding, not monsters." Annalise, caught between the villagers' fears and the outsiders' skepticism, sought solace in prayer. She remembered the old tales, the stories whispered around the hearth, tales that spoke of ancient evils and restless spirits. Could there be some truth to them? Skepticism warred with duty within Sergeant Klaus. He scoffed at the idea of a headless horseman, Yet he could not ignore the palpable fear gripping his people. He doubled the guard, patrolling the village perimeter, his senses on high alert. Brother Matthias, meanwhile, retreated to the monastery library. He sought answers in the wisdom of the ancients, hoping to find some explanation for the growing hysteria, some rational basis for the seemingly irrational fears. Driven by a growing sense of urgency, Annalise ventured into the woods surrounding Sleepy Hollow. She knew the forests well, having roamed them since childhood, gathering herbs and berries. But today, the woods felt different, charged with a palpable tension. Sergeant Klaus, following up on reports of disturbed livestock, discovered a set of unusual tracks near the edge of the woods. They were too large to be a horse, and yet, there was something unnatural about them, something that sent a shiver down his spine. Brother Matthias, realizing that the source of the fear might lie deeper than simple superstition, sought out the village elder, a woman steeped in the folklore and traditions of Sleepy Hollow. He hoped she could shed some light on the origins of the Headless Horseman legend. Deep within the woods, Annalise discovered a clearing she had never seen before. In the center stood an ancient oak, its bark scarred with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. A wave of dread washed over her, confirming her worst fears. A blood-curdling scream pierced the night. Sergeant Klaus, hearing the sound, spurred his horse into action, racing towards the woods, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the terror of Sleepy Hollow was far from over. Back at the monastery, Brother Matthias watched the storm gathering over Sleepy Hollow. He felt a growing sense of foreboding, a premonition that the village was teetering on the brink of something terrible. He knew, with a heavy heart, that the coming days would test the faith and courage of everyone in Sleepy Hollow. Sergeant Klaus regarded the trampled earth, another farmer claiming livestock gone missing. The stories were becoming tiresome. He'd seen hardship before, seen men crack under pressure. But this Headless Horseman nonsense was a new level of hysteria. He knelt studying the ground. Hoofprints, yes, but ordinary ones. Not the fiery, spectral steeds the villagers described. Just a common horse, ridden hard and fast. "Tell me again, Farmer Giles," Klaus said, his voice patient but firm. "Did you see this horseman, or did you just hear it?" The farmer wrung his hands, eyes wide with fear. From the edge of the field, Brother Matthias watched. He understood the villagers' fear, the way anxieties could fester and take root in the darkness of ignorance. He hoped Klaus would find a rational explanation before the fear consumed them all. The crop failures were another matter entirely. Klaus examined a stalk of wheat, brittle and lifeless. It wasn't just the missing livestock, something was indeed amiss. But a headless horseman, ridiculous. Annalise approached Klaus, her eyes filled with concern. "Sergeant," she said softly, "the elders say the land is sick, that we have angered the old spirits." Klaus took the herbs, turning them over in his hand. Superstition. He'd seen it breed like rats in times of hardship. "Thank you, Annalise," he said, "but I deal in facts, not fables." He wouldn't dismiss the villagers' fears entirely, not yet. Something was happening in Sleepy Hollow, and Klaus intended to find out what, one logical step at a time. The woods. He'd start there. The woods were silent, save for the rustle of leaves. Klaus scanned the trees, his senses on high alert. If someone was preying on the village, they'd be using the forest for cover. Brother Matthias continued towards the village, the weight of the community's fear heavy on his shoulders. He prayed that Klaus would find something concrete, something to quell the rising tide of panic. Annalise watched the woods from her window, her heart heavy with dread. She remembered the old tales, the whispers of restless spirits and ancient curses. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. Klaus emerged from the woods, the setting sun casting long shadows behind him. In his hand he clutched a scrap of dark cloth. It was old and torn, and it smelled faintly of sulfur. The Headless Horseman might be a fable, but something was definitely lurking in the darkness. The woods held a silence that spoke louder than any scream. Annalise felt it, a weight pressing down on Sleepy Hollow, a burden of forgotten tales and whispered fears. "They say," Annalise began, her voice dropping to a whisper, "that before our village this valley was a place of shadows, that a great battle was fought here and a warrior lost his head, forever searching for it in the night." Brother Matthias sought answers not in the whispers of villagers, but in the silent wisdom of ancient texts. He searched for any mention of Sleepy Hollow, any clue to the source of its current unrest. He found mentions of pagan rituals performed in the valley long before the village was established, sacrifices to appease dark gods, stories of a hidden, haunted grove. Klaus patrolled the village, a grim sentinel against an unseen enemy. He saw fear in every shadow, suspicion in every glance. The villagers were more afraid of each other than any phantom. Annalise stopped him. "Sergeant," she said, her voice low, "the old tales they speak of a place in the woods, a burial ground forgotten by time. They say restless spirits wander there." Klaus scoffed, but something in Annalise's voice gave him pause. He knew the villagers held onto these old stories, and it was best to calm the fear. Brother Matthias sought out Klaus. "Sergeant, I have found records, mention of unusual events and the burial of the war dead from the First War with England near the village. There are tales of unrestful sleep." Klaus listened, his skepticism warring with a growing unease. Two accounts from different perspectives were beginning to create a compelling narrative. Annalise led Klaus and a small band of armed villagers into the woods. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. The old burial ground was not far. Brother Matthias, joining the expedition, carried only his faith and the knowledge that some evils were born not of the supernatural, but of the hearts of men. They reached the burial ground, a place forgotten and forsaken, where the past refused to stay buried. The shadows danced, and a cold wind whispered secrets of Sleepy Hollow's darker history. Sergeant Klaus patrolled the perimeter of Sleepy Hollow. The night was unusually still, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. He told himself the villagers' fears were born of ignorance and trauma, but the disquiet in his own gut was undeniable. A rustling in the undergrowth turned into a thunderous gallop. Klaus braced himself, expecting a wild boar or perhaps a panicked deer. Instead, a dark shape emerged from the trees, a horse, riderless, but seeming to carry a massive, indistinct form on its back. It vanished into the darkness as quickly as it appeared. He dismounted, his spear held high, searching for tracks. The ground was churned as if by a heavy beast, but there were no discernible hoofprints, no sign of a rider. A chill ran down his spine, a primal fear he hadn't felt since childhood. Back at the village, Klaus stared into the fire. The image of the phantom rider burned into his mind. He'd always prided himself on his pragmatism, his ability to see through superstition. But what he'd witnessed defied explanation. He sought out Brother Matthias at the monastery. The monk listened patiently, his eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and concern. "Sergeant," he said softly, "fear can play tricks on the mind, but even tricks have a source." Annalise approached Klaus the next morning. "Sergeant," she said, her voice low, "Old Man Hemlock has been acting strange. He's always been touched, but lately he's been muttering about vengeance and headless riders." Klaus questioned Old Man Hemlock. The old man's ramblings were mostly incoherent, filled with fragmented tales of past injustices and forgotten grievances. But one phrase stood out: "The Hessians do blood for blood." Klaus and brother Matthias delved into the village records, searching for any mention of a Hessian. They discovered a faded account of a mercenary soldier, rumored to have been beheaded during a skirmish decades ago. The soldier's family had been denied justice, their pleas ignored. That evening, Annalise approached Klaus again. "There's more, Sergeant," she whispered. "My grandmother remembers talk of a hidden cache of weapons belonging to the Hessians' family. They were said to be skilled blacksmiths." Klaus gathered a small group of militiamen and headed towards the old blacksmith's workshop. The place had been abandoned for years, the roof caved in, the walls crumbling. But something felt off. He noticed a loose stone slab near the back of the workshop. With a grunt, he heaved it aside, revealing a dark, narrow entrance leading underground. The air emanating from the hole was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of iron and decay. Klaus lit a torch and descended into the darkness. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that whatever he found in that cellar would reveal the truth behind Sleepy Hollow's terror. The truth, and very likely, the identity of their Headless Horseman. Brother Matthias immersed himself in the monastery's archives, seeking answers to the unease gripping Sleepy Hollow. He suspected the Headless Horseman was merely a symptom, not the disease itself. The true ailment, he felt, lay hidden within the village's own tangled web of relationships and resentments. Annalise, deeply concerned for her community, moved through the market, a place that was usually bustling with commerce but now felt heavy with dread. She paid close attention to snippets of conversation, hoping to glean some insight into the root of the village's fear and the potential sources of the rumors. Sergeant Klaus, attempting to maintain order, questioned the local farmers. The accounts were vague, filled with fear and superstition. He pressed for details, seeking inconsistencies that might point to a more earthly explanation than a spectral horseman. He suspected someone was exploiting the villagers' fears for their own gain. Brother Matthias sought counsel from the monastery elder, a man with deep roots in the region. He learned of old land disputes, simmering resentments between families, and whispers of unfair practices. The village's history, he realized, was a fertile ground for discontent and perhaps deceit. While tending her family's garden, Annalise overheard a heated argument between two farmers over water rights. The bitterness in their voices was palpable, a stark reminder of the underlying tensions that simmered beneath the surface of village life. She knew such conflicts could easily be exploited. Sergeant Klaus, acting on a tip, visited the stables of a prosperous landowner known for his ruthlessness in business. He observed the healthy livestock, contrasting sharply with the losses reported by other farmers. The landowner's nervous denials only heightened Klaus's suspicions. Brother Matthias sought out a former village elder, now living in exile. The man, embittered by past injustices, spoke of long-forgotten rivalries and hidden acts of vengeance. His words painted a picture of a community fractured by secrets and resentments, a place where the truth was often buried beneath layers of deceit. Annalise visited a family struck by illness, their farm falling into disrepair. The sight of their suffering fueled her determination to uncover the truth behind the village's troubles. She suspected that the fear and paranoia were being deliberately manipulated to prey on the most vulnerable. Sergeant Klaus confronted the wealthy landowner, presenting circumstantial evidence of his involvement in the livestock thefts and the spread of the Headless Horseman rumors. He suspected the landowner was attempting to destabilize the village to acquire more land and power. The confrontation was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Brother Matthias studied a map of Sleepy Hollow, meticulously marking the locations of past conflicts, property lines, and family connections. He sought to identify patterns and connections that might reveal the underlying motives behind the village's unrest. He realized that the land itself was a source of contention, a prize worth fighting for. Annalise, acting on a hunch, followed several discontented villagers into the woods. She observed a clandestine meeting, overhearing snippets of a plan to exploit the village's fear and sow further discord. She realized that the Headless Horseman was a tool, wielded by those seeking to gain control of Sleepy Hollow. Sergeant Klaus and Brother Matthias met in secret, exchanging information gathered from their respective investigations. The evidence pointed to a conspiracy within the village, a deliberate attempt to destabilize Sleepy Hollow for personal gain. The Headless Horseman, they concluded, was a carefully crafted illusion designed to mask a more sinister plot. Brother Matthias felt a prickle of unease as he entered the woods. The air hung heavy, a sense of watchful silence pressing down on him. He adjusted the psalter in his hand, a small comfort against the growing disquiet. Klaus led the way, his senses on high alert. He knew these woods well, but today they felt different, tainted by fear and whispered rumors. He gripped his spear tighter, his scar throbbing faintly. Matthias stopped, pointing to a crudely carved symbol on a beech tree. "Klaus, look at this. It's unlike anything I've seen before. A horse's head, but distorted, almost mocking." Klaus grunted, running a gloved hand over the rough carving. "Could be anything, Matthias. A prank, perhaps, or just some bored woodcutter." Matthias disagreed. "The lines are too deliberate, Klaus, and the location, its place to be seen to be a marker of some kind." Klaus moved on, following a barely discernible trail through the undergrowth. "Let's see where it leads, then. I've tracked deer with less to go on." They emerged into a small clearing. The charred remains of a fire pit marked the center, the air still thick with the acrid smell of burnt wood. It was clear someone had been here recently. Annalise approached the clearing, her face pale. She had followed them, drawn by a sense of foreboding. "This place. I know this place." Klaus turned to her, his voice gruff but laced with concern. "What do you know of this place, Annalise?" Annalise swallowed hard. "This is, or was, a gathering place, for the old ways, before the monastery came, before the true God." Matthias listened, his mind racing. He knew of the old pagan beliefs that still lingered in the hearts of some villagers, suppressed but never truly extinguished. Klaus looked at Annalise, then back at the darkening woods. The Headless Horseman, the strange symbols, the pagan gatherings. It was all beginning to weave together into a tapestry of fear and superstition. "We need to find out who's been here and why, before this fear consumes us all." Sergeant Klaus addressed the nervous crowd. "Enough. These tales, they're feeding on themselves. We need facts, not whispers." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces before him. "Someone is stoking this fear, and I intend to find out who." Annalise approached Klaus, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sergeant, old Martha claims to have seen the horseman again, near Widow Ilara's farm, but Martha often exaggerates." Klaus, skeptical but thorough, questioned Martha. Her story was rambling, filled with inconsistencies. It became clear she was embellishing, fueled by fear and a desire for attention. Brother Matthias, observing from a distance, felt a pang of sadness. Martha's lies, however misguided, were a symptom of the deeper illness gripping Sleepy Hollow, a fear that twisted truth into monstrous shapes. "Martha," Klaus said, his voice firm, "you've spread false tales. Fear is a dangerous weapon. If this continues, there will be consequences." Annalise approached Klaus. "Sergeant, while Martha's tales are fanciful, I overheard her talking to Thomas the miller earlier. He seemed to be encouraging her." Klaus found Thomas at the mill, his face flushed. Thomas initially denied any involvement, but under Klaus's persistent questioning, his story crumbled. He admitted to encouraging Martha, claiming he wanted to wake the village up to the evil that plagued them. Klaus recounted his conversation with Thomas to Brother Matthias. "He speaks of evil, brother, but his eyes, they held something more than fear, a kind of resentment." That night Klaus watched the mill. He saw Thomas emerge, speaking in hushed tones with a cloaked figure, their faces hidden in shadow. A chilling realization dawned on Klaus. Thomas was not acting alone. Klaus moved swiftly, intercepting the cloaked figure. "Show yourself," he demanded, his voice ringing through the quiet night. The figure threw back their hood. It was Alara, the widow whose farm was supposedly targeted by the horsemen. Annalise, who had followed Klaus, gasped in disbelief. "You," Klaus exclaimed, stunned. Alara's face was contorted with rage. "They took everything from me, the plague and then the land. I will make them pay for what they did." It was clear now. Alara, driven by grief and resentment, was orchestrating the terror, using Thomas as her pawn, fueling the legend of the Headless Horseman to sow chaos and exact her revenge. The abandoned mine, a gaping maw in the earth, had been the focal point of Annalise's warnings. Klaus felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He followed the freshest tracks here, the mud churned by shod hooves, the air thick with a familiar, acrid scent. Brother Matthias followed close behind, his lantern cutting through the oppressive darkness. The air grew colder, the silence broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water and the distant screech of a bat. He clutched his psalms, a silent prayer forming on his lips. Annalise remained outside, her heart pounding against her ribs. She knew this place, knew the stories whispered about it, tales of misfortune and forgotten souls. The fear she had felt before was multiplied tenfold now, as she realized the truth. The tunnel opened into a hidden chamber. A crude furnace roared, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Klaus lowered his spear, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. A makeshift workshop, tools scattered across a rough table, and the unmistakable glint of polished metal. Brother Matthias gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. At the workbench, illuminated by the furnace's glow, stood Wilhelm, the village blacksmith. He was hunched over a piece of metal, carefully shaping it with hammer and tongs. The helmet gleamed ominously in the dim light. Wilhelm spun around, his eyes wide with fear. The hammer clattered to the ground. "Sergeant Klaus, Brother Matthias, what are you doing here?" "The Headless Horseman," Klaus stated, his voice hard. "It was you, Wilhelm, all this time it was you." Wilhelm's face crumpled. No, you don't understand. I only wanted to help." "Help by terrorizing the village?" Brother Matthias asked gently. "Tell us, Wilhelm, why?" Wilhelm slumped onto a stool, his shoulders shaking. "The crops, the livestock, they've been failing for years. The wealthy landowners hoard their grain while the rest of us starve. No one cared. So I decided to make them care, to instill fear into those who were prospering while the rest of us suffered. It started as a prank, but it got out of hand. Klaus stared down at him, his face etched with disappointment. So, all the fear, the unrest, it was for this, for petty grievances. Anneliese entered the chamber, her face pale but resolute. She looked at Wilhelm, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. The fear of the Headless Horseman was over, but the real darkness, the resentment and injustice that festered within Sleepy Hollow, remained. The dawn broke pale and clean over Sleepy Hollow. A fragile peace settled over the village after the unmasking of their tormentor. The fear that had held them captive began to dissipate like morning mist. Klaus, though burdened by the events, felt a surge of responsibility. The real work had just begun, rebuilding trust and ensuring the safety of his people. Anneliese tended her garden, the familiar scent of herbs grounding her. The knowledge that the Headless Horseman was a man, driven by greed and exploiting their fears, was both a relief and a chilling reminder of human fallibility. Brother Matthias addressed the villagers. He spoke of forgiveness, of understanding the darkness that could take root in men's hearts, and the importance of reason and faith working in harmony. Klaus organized the men, directing them to repair the fences and reinforce the village defenses. Practical measures were necessary, a tangible response to the unease that still lingered. Anneliese, with a quiet empathy, helped the elderly and infirm. Small acts of kindness wove a stronger fabric of community, mending the tears caused by fear. Brother Matthias returned to his books, seeking solace and guidance in the ancient texts. He knew that the lessons of the past could illuminate the path forward. Klaus, with a renewed sense of purpose, drilled the village men in basic defense. He aimed to instill not only skill but also confidence, to empower them against future threats. Anneliese shared stories with the children, tales of courage and resilience, carefully woven to counter the darkness they had endured. She wanted them to remember the past but not to be defined by it. Brother Matthias, Klaus, and Anneliese met, their conversation filled with cautious optimism. They understood that true healing would take time, but the seeds of hope had been sown. The villagers worked together, side by side, rebuilding what had been broken. Each swing of the hammer, each shared loaf of bread, was a testament to their renewed unity. Sleepy Hollow was scarred but not broken. The shadow of fear had receded, replaced by a hard-won understanding that darkness could be overcome, not by superstition, but by the enduring strength of faith, reason, and community.